From a poor boy growing up in the rural hills of Kentucky, Ricky Skaggs rose to become a powerful icon of country music, amassing a massive fortune estimated at up to $20 million. At his peak, Ricky had everything the world desires: fame and wealth. But fate never gives anything away for free. Ricky Skaggs was forced to pay a price that cannot be measured. His absence from his children's childhood, long stretches of gnawing loneliness, and finally the moment he lay on an operating table when he had to place his very heart into the hands of destiny. For that reason, the story of Ricky Skaggs is not merely the journey of a star, but an epic ballad of sacrifice and collapse at the very edge of life and death until he was compelled to understand one simple truth. Real success is not found in a bank account, but in whether one can still make it back home in time. To truly understand the origins of that tear-soaked fortune, we must turn the clock back to the 1980s, the era when the money-printing machine called Ricky Skaggs began running at full throttle. Yet before redrawing the financial map of country music, Ricky was once trapped in a cruel Nashville paradox, the clash between talent and putting food on the table. Before that, Ricky had been a bluegrass prodigy, a genre known for its demanding musicianship, often described as a sacred temple of technique, yet a commercial dead end in terms of revenue. Keenly aware that the admiration of connoisseurs could not be converted into financial power, he chose a bold path. Ricky blended the refinement and complexity of bluegrass with the smoothness and accessibility of modern country. It did not cheapen his art, he packaged it for mass audiences. It was a gamble, a risky fusion between the raw simplicity of the mountains and the neon lights of the city. If he failed, he would lose both worlds. If he succeeded, he would own them all. History quickly proved that Ricky Skaggs was one step ahead of Nashville. When Crying My Heart Out Over You climbed to #1 in 1982, it was not merely a hit song, it was the moment the door to immense wealth officially swung open. From county fair stages and unstable incomes, Ricky entered a phase in which money began pouring in relentlessly as Highway 40 Blues and then Country Boy went on to dominate radio airwaves across the United States. In an era when radio held absolute power, airplay meant audiences opening their wallets to buy records. The printing presses at Epic Records were forced to run day and night to satisfy the market's thirst for the name Ricky Skaggs. Royalty income and copyright earnings began flowing into Ricky Skaggs' accounts without pause. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, a quiet yet steady stream that continued even while he slept. Tickets to concerts and arenas holding tens of thousands of fans sold out completely within hours, while performance fees soared to between $50,000 and $100,000 per show, placing him on par with the world's biggest pop superstars. The grueling touring schedule of the entire 1980s alone was enough to bring Ricky several $1 million a year, lifting him from a boy raised in Appalachian poverty straight into the ranks of America's new upper class. The year 1985 marked the moment Ricky Skaggs reached the absolute pinnacle of power and fame when he was honored as Entertainer of the Year, the highest accolade in country music. At that point, Ricky was no longer simply a successful star. In the eyes of both the public and industry insiders, he became the symbol of a return, bringing country music back to the raw, authentic sounds that had once stood on the brink of being forgotten. Even Chet Atkins acknowledged that Ricky Skaggs had helped preserve the soul of country music as it was gradually fading amid the wave of commercialization. That same year, Ricky's status was placed alongside the most powerful names of the era, such as Alabama, George Strait, and Kenny Rogers, artists who dominated radio, stadiums, and the American record market. It was the year Ricky commanded his highest fees, maintained his most intense touring schedule, and wielded the greatest commercial influence of his entire career. And every decision he made could trigger a chain reaction throughout Nashville. Yet it was precisely at this highest summit that Ricky began to feel something he had never had time to face before: exhaustion. The pressure of expectations of being labeled the savior of country music weighed heavily on a man who was naturally accustomed to a quiet life. Behind the thunderous applause and dazzling stage lights, Ricky Skaggs was still the same mountain boy he had always been, unaccustomed to prolonged noise and gradually realizing that glory never comes with peace and money is never a free gift. Moment his bank account first crossed the $1 million Mark was also the moment Ricky unconsciously stepped into a cycle that did not allow him to stop. To keep that machine running, he was forced to trade away the only asset that could never be replaced, his presence in his family's life. From then on, Ricky lived on his tour bus, the Silver Eagle, more than in his own home, as endless highways gradually replaced the very idea of a stable roof over his head. That prolonged absence slowly turned Ricky into a husband on the phone to Sharon White, the woman who quietly carried the entire household on her shoulders, acting as both mother and father, raising their children alone while the man of the family chased one endless stage after another. The tragedy of wealth lies in this bitter paradox. While millions of fans screamed his name under blazing lights and worshipped him as an icon, behind the curtain all that remained was a silent emptiness. After each performance, Ricky returned to luxurious hotel rooms that lacked nothing except a sense of belonging. He ate late dinners in silence, only to confront the haunting question of moments that had permanently slipped away from his children's childhood. School events, birthdays, mornings when a father should have been there. The Skaggs children grew up accustomed to seeing their father on television screens accepting awards and applause, while the chair at the family dinner table, the place where he should have been, was almost always empty. It was a slow erosion of the spirit, and the most frightening part was that Ricky did not dare to stop. The pressure to maintain the #1 position, combined with the fear of being forgotten, bound him tightly to an inescapable cycle until, while believing he was sacrificing himself for his family, he gradually realized a painful truth. Harder he tried to hold on to everything, the more he lost the people who mattered most. However, unlike flash-in-the-pan stars who squandered their money on reckless excess, Ricky Skaggs used that loneliness and obsession to build a true empire, one grounded in tangible, lasting assets. He did not buy supercars to show off, nor did he purchase mansions merely to take photos. He used money to buy control, to buy security, and to buy things that could fill the voids within his soul. Skaggs' Place studio in Hendersonville stands as the clearest expression of that choice, a musical sanctuary built with virtually his entire fortune, equipped with some of the most advanced technology available. Yet it was within that perfectly soundproof space that Ricky confined himself for dozens of hours each day, quietly retreating from family life and unintentionally continuing to trade time with the people he loved most in exchange for a sense of calm he could only find among musical notes. And then, hidden deep inside a safe alongside property deeds, lay the instrument collection known as Wooden Gold. The 1923 Gibson Lloyd Loar mandolins, each valued at hundreds of thousands of dollars, were not merely priceless collectibles, they were obsessions. Ricky bought them not only for their extraordinary sound, but seemingly to compensate for nameless voids within himself. Every one of those instruments, no matter how valuable, lies soaked in sweat and even blood from fingers hardened and cracked by years of playing. They were beautiful, flawless, yet cold, resting silently in velvet cases, like mute witnesses to a life that had sacrificed everything for art. The peak of this financial tragedy, and the most striking proof of Ricky Skaggs' madness, came in the late 1990s. At that time, the country music market began to shift. Radio stations that had once celebrated him now turned away, chasing younger, more pop-oriented trends. An ordinary person, armed with the vast wealth he had accumulated, would have chosen to retire comfortably and enjoy old age alongside children and grandchildren. But Ricky Skaggs was not an ordinary man. He used his own money, draining the fortune he had built over a lifetime to launch his own record label, Skaggs Family Records. It was a life-or-death gamble in which Ricky placed everything he had on the scales of fate, accepting the risk of losing it all, and even pushing his family to the brink of ruin in exchange for one thing alone: the freedom to play the music he believed in without bowing to any boss. Sharon White, the wife who had already endured so much, once again stood silently by as her husband placed the future of the entire family on that wager. Ricky won. That gamble transformed him from a hired artist into a true owner, someone who held complete control over his musical legacy. Yet that victory also drained the last reserves of strength left after decades of relentless touring, delivering a heavy final blow to a body that was already exhausted. That blow revealed itself in 2020, What began as vague aches during a routine checkup in Nashville led to a cardiac angiogram and a devastating discovery. 4 major arteries supplying his heart were severely blocked. The doctor warned him plainly that if he stepped onto that tour bus again, he might never return. An emergency quadruple bypass surgery followed, as the surgeon later recounted. When blood flow was restored, Ricky's heart trembled violently and began beating powerfully in his hands as if declaring defiance against death itself. When Ricky awoke, he wept, the first time he understood that all the glory in the world would mean nothing if that heart stopped. Recovery forced him to slow down, to sit quietly and feel sunlight through the window, to realize simply, I am still here. 6 months later, he returned to the stage not with conquest in mind but with gratitude. He said he felt 150% better, not only physically but spiritually. He had been given a second life, and he intended to live it differently. To understand how he endured it all, we must go back to Cordell, Kentucky, where he was born in 1954 at 5 years old. His father brought home a worn mandolin from a pawn shop with no teacher. Ricky taught himself, mastering complex sounds within weeks. At 6, he stepped onto a stage with Bill Monroe, who placed his own mandolin over the boy's shoulders. At 7, he appeared on national television with Flat and Skaggs. He was called a prodigy, but instead of chasing easy fame, he chose discipline. At 15, he joined Ralph Stanley's Clinch Mountain Boys, enduring grueling bus rides and meager pay, learning that music is not just technique but pain and longing poured into every note. Through the 1970s, he pushed boundaries, joining progressive bluegrass groups and eventually Emmylou Harris's Hot Band in 1977, where he learned how to merge artistry with commercial appeal. That knowledge became the foundation of his 1980s explosion. Today, at 71, Ricky Skaggs is no longer chasing charts. He lives quietly with Sharon White, cherishing over 4 decades of marriage. His joy now comes from sunsets on the porch, laughter from his children Molly and Luke, and the sound of grandchildren at his feet. He still performs, but as an elder guiding the next generation, to preserving bluegrass through Skaggs Place Studio and mentoring young artists. His faith has deepened, especially after surviving heart surgery. He devotes himself to charitable work, helping tornado victims in Kentucky, supporting education and cultural preservation. The money printing machine has stopped, replaced by gratitude. Ricky Skaggs traveled from poverty to the pinnacle of fame, and back to the simplest truths: family, faith, and service. His fortune cannot be measured in dollars alone. It was forged in sacrifice, absence, exhaustion, and a heart that once stopped and was granted another chance. And perhaps his greatest legacy is this lesson: success only truly matters if we still make it back in time to the people we love. Even now, when audiences rise to their feet as he steps beneath the lights of the Grand Ole Opry, there is something different in Ricky Skaggs' presence. The fire is still there. The fingers still move with astonishing precision, striking mandolin strings with the speed and clarity that once stunned Bill Monroe, but the hunger has changed. It is no longer the hunger of a young man determined to prove himself to Nashville. It is the steady flame of someone who has already seen the summit, fallen to his knees, and been lifted back up in quieter interviews. Ricky has admitted that the bypass surgery did more than repair blocked arteries, it unclogged something deeper. For decades, he had measured time in tour dates, chart positions, and studio sessions. After 2020, he began measuring it in mornings, in ordinary breakfasts, in the simple act of sitting beside Sharon without glancing at a schedule. The man who once feared stepping off the treadmill of fame now guards his calendar with care. Understands that every yes to the road is a no to something at home. There is a certain irony in the fact that the boy who once slept on bus seats across Appalachia eventually owned one of the finest studios in Tennessee, only to realize that silence on a porch can be richer than applause in an arena. The trophies still sit polished, the Grammys still reflect light, but they no longer define him. If anything, they remind him how fragile it all was. His children now grown, see a different father than the one who raced through airports in the 1980s. They see a man who listens longer, who tells stories about Ralph Stanley and Emmylou Harris, not as career milestones, but as life lessons. They see someone who understands that legacy is not built only in vinyl and gold records, but in presence, in showing up. And perhaps the most powerful image of Ricky Skaggs today is not of him gripping a mandolin under spotlights, but of him bowing his head in prayer before a show. Gratitude has replaced ambition as the driving force. He often speaks of stewardship, of being entrusted with talent, with influence, with a second chance. To him, survival was not luck, it was responsibility. There is also humility in how he speaks about the 1980s, the era that once defined him, now feels like a chapter rather than the whole book. He does not deny the thrill of hearing his songs at #1. He does not pretend the wealth did not change his life. But he also does not romanticize it. He knows the cost. He remembers the empty hotel rooms, the birthdays missed, the quiet ache after the applause faded, yet there is no bitterness in him. That may be the most remarkable part. Many artists who rise and fall carry scars that harden into resentment. Ricky carries his as reminders. They shaped him, they slowed him. That success without balance is a fragile victory. In recent years, when young musicians come to him seeking advice, he rarely begins with technique. He talks about character, about guarding your marriage, about not confusing applause with love. He warns them that the road can take more than it gives if they are not careful. And when he picks up a 1923 Gibson Lloyd Loar mandolin, he does so, not as a collector showing off a trophy, but as a craftsman honoring history. The mountains of Kentucky still echo in his playing. You can hear it in the way he bends a note, in the ache behind a melody. That sound was forged long before epic records, before arenas, before Entertainer of the Year. It was born in a small house where a father handed a 5-year-old boy a pawn-shop mandolin and unknowingly changed the trajectory of American music. Ricky Skaggs understands now that his life unfolded in movements like a symphony. The innocence of childhood discovery, the relentless drive of ambition, the dizzying crescendo of fame, the near silence of a hospital room, finally, the gentle resolution of gratitude. He is still creating, still recording, still stepping onto stages, but the urgency has softened. If the audience cheers, he smiles. If they do not, he still plays with the same devotion. Not because the music was never meant to be a ladder to climb forever. It was a gift to carry carefully. In the end, when people speak of Ricky Skaggs, they will mention the hits, the Grammys, the revival of traditional country. They will speak of his technical brilliance and his business instincts. But those who know the full story will remember something deeper. They will remember the man who stood at the edge of death and came back different. The man who learned that a fortune can be counted in dollars, but a life is counted in moments. And somewhere in Tennessee, as the sun sets beyond the trees and laughter drifts across a quiet yard, Ricky Skaggs sits with a mandolin resting lightly in his hands, not to conquer the world, not to chase another chart, simply to play. And in the quietest hours of the evening, when the noise of the world finally fades, there is a moment that says more than any award ever could. The porch light glows softly. The air in Tennessee carries that gentle country stillness he once spent decades running from. Beside the house are photographs, black and white memories of a mountain boy. Glossy magazine covers from the 1980s, framed gold records, smiling. Grandchildren, lifetime pressed between glass. Ricky sits back in his chair, mandolin resting against his chest. His fingers no longer move with the urgency of a man trying to outrun time. They move slowly now, deliberately, drawing out notes that feel less like performance and more like prayer. There is no roaring crowd, no spotlight, no doorbus, waiting with the engine running, just the steady rhythm of a heart that once stopped and started again. He looks out across the yard where laughter once echoed earlier in the day. He knows there were years he cannot get back. School mornings missed, birthday candles blown out without him, applause that sounded loud but felt hollow. Those absences will always exist. Success did not erase them, but grace gave him something else. Another chance not to be a bigger star, not to earn another million, but to sit still long enough to understand what truly mattered all along. The boy from Cordell, Kentucky, the child who stood under Bill Monroe's gaze with an oversized mandolin, traveled through fame, fortune, pressure, pride, exhaustion, and fear. He stood at the summit of country music. He stood at the edge of death. And in both places he learned the same lesson. None of it means anything if your heart stops beating for the people you love. The final note he plays that night lingers in the air just a little longer than the others. It is soft, unrushed, certain. It is not the sound of a man chasing. It's history. It is the sound of a man who has finally come home, and perhaps that more than the charts, the titles, or the fortune is Ricky Skaggs' greatest victory.